I'm Ben Wattenberg. We at Think Tank report to you from the nation's capital, but we've never talked about the nation's capital. Washington, D.C. seems to be in perpetual crisis. What can be done? Joining us are Tom Sherwood, author of Dream City, Race, Power, and the Decline of Washington, D.C., and a reporter for WRC News 4 in Washington. Dwight Cropp, professor of public administration at George Washington University and a 30-year veteran of D.C. government. Ronald Walters, professor of political science at the University of Maryland and author of Black Presidential Politics in America, and Jonetta Barras, author of 2 volumes of poetry and a columnist for the Washington Times. The topic before this House, capital improvements, this week on Think Tank. Washington, D.C. has 2 faces. It has some of the most beautiful and recognizable landmarks in the world, and it also has a reputation as a place to live that has tarnished over the decades. In 1974, after a prolonged struggle, the Congress granted the District of Columbia home rule, meaning that the district could pretty well run itself, but that has been a bumpy road. The longtime mayor of Washington, Marion Barry, has been immersed in scandals. The city's murder rate is among the nation's highest. The population has dropped 25% since 1960. Washington spends proportionately more on welfare than any other city. It has sunk further and further into debt as revenues have declined while expenses have skyrocketed. Now, reform is in the air. In 1995, the federal government created a control board to rein in city spending. Speaker Newt Gingrich and Washington's representative in Congress, Eleanor Holmes Norton, have suggested a tax cut that will attract new residents. President Clinton recently proposed a federal takeover of the city's prisons, taxes, health care, and courts in return for eliminating the annual payment from the federal government. Yet, for all of Washington's problems, there is something that those of us who live in this city know. A recent poll showed that the District of Columbia was one of the top 10 nicest cities to live in the United States of America. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Tom Sherwood, let us begin the question with you. Washington's been getting a bad press. Is that a bum rap or a fair rap?
In some respects it is, but people need to understand the nation's capital is unlike any other place in America. Congress set up a lousy system of limited home rule here, and local politicians have made it worse. But there's so much misunderstanding about the capital. It's not just bumbling, fumbling bureaucrats. Some real serious structural problems have to be changed.
Ron Walters?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think what we have been trying to do is to look at the structural problems of the District of Columbia, and all the while, I think the media has been trumpeting many of the facts that you listed. Those are the facts that have been leading the bandwagon, shaping the image of the District of Columbia. And it's been very difficult to get any other message, any other positive message about the District of Columbia out.
Okay, Dwight Cropp.
Well, I think you have to look at it from a threefold perspective. We have a broken economy, a broken governance structure, and a broken management structure. All 3 have to be addressed at the same time.
Okay, Jonetta Barras.
I think what they've said is true, and notwithstanding the structural problems, the city has been poorly managed for the last 10 years. Part of that, of course, has a lot to do with the scandals, as you mentioned, with Marion Barry. But this city is like a lot of other cities. A lot of cities have been dying, and I think it's a part of also the federal policies have not done well by cities in this country.
Tom Sherwood, your book is called Dream City. What's it about?
Well, Harry Jaffe of the Washingtonian Magazine and I wrote this book. It came out in 1994. Simon & Schuster published it. We called it Dream City, not just because it's D.C. or the initials, but because throughout its history, the nation's capital has had someone, some organization, some group that has deigned to think of how they are going to fix the nation's capital. Throughout, it was a limited home rule, it was an appointed city mayor, it was appointed city council, it was a 3-commissioner form of government for 100 years.
When I came to Washington to work on President Johnson's staff in the mid-1960s, the D.C. was pretty well run out of Steve Pollock's office in the old executive office building. He was a counsel to the president. He was running the commission.
Well, I think, I think that's a misconception.
Yeah, I think it ran in some
I think
parts
it's a
of the city
misconception.
ran well, but it's
I
for
mean,
mostly white people
yeah.
in the city it ran well.
I think it's a very because when home rule was finally
This was before home rule.
Yes.
no, but when we got home rule, we found that there was an ongoing deficit, that the books had never been audited, and that the city had a large number of people on the payroll. If you look at congressional House congressional reports, budget reports from 1970, 71, before home rule, they talk about the excessive number of people on the payroll. So I don't think it was that
And
well
they spent
run.
money.
Yeah, but I would add
I
one
didn't
thing
say
to
it was
that.
well run. I just said he ran it.
Clearly the roads were better. And
So it's not just that it wasn't demographically represented, it was also in terms of what were the priorities. Tom mentioned the roads were in good shape. Of course the roads were in good shape. That was something that was a priority for the federal government. There were other priorities for the federal government, but the neighborhoods where people lived and worked were not necessarily well served by that kind of a system.
And race is a part of this, because at this time we're talking about a District of Columbia that was 70% black. And so that the fact that people really didn't participate is really, I think, of the merit. And see, this is one of the reasons why, if you look at the struggle for home rule, the District of Columbia, it really was coterminous and came out of the civil rights movement. That's where I think this was.
And Marion Barry came out of the
Marion
civil
Barry
rights
came out of
movement.
the civil rights movement.
All right, let us stipulate that while the federal government ran Washington, D.C., all was not perfect, and in fact there was a lot of things very wrong with it. All right, now home rule comes in when?
1973 was when Congress went into effect in 74 with elections, and people took office in 75.
Well, how has it worked out?
Well, it hasn't worked out very well at all, I don't think. I mean, my position is, of course, that we don't really have home rule. We've never really had home rule. What we have is a hybrid somewhere in between self-government and continuing congressional rule. So it's difficult to put your finger on who is responsible. You look at the schools today. We had a situation until very recently where the Congress had line item control of the school budget, and the elected mayor and the council did not have line item control. This was only changed
And the
a
schools
couple
were
of years
terrible
ago.
under that.
Right.
Well, let's just say, though, I think we have to say, too, for listeners' purposes, that the Congress, according to the Constitution, always will maintain control over the nation's capital. And so, therefore, the home rule that was set up was a, quote, limited home rule, so that people in this city could elect, you know, their council, their mayor, and a delegate to the Congress who is a non-voting delegate to the Congress. But of course, Congress, based on the Constitution, will always have the kind of control that people in this city doesn't want it to have.
And it really is. I mean, one of the reasons we're running this program is that this is it's both a city, like many other big cities in America, and it is a national city. The Metro says on it, America's subway. Right? I mean, you know, it goes to Virginia and Maryland, not all of America. So I mean, this is of interest to all Americans to have a capital city that they're proud of,
That's
and so
right.
on and so forth.
But you know, I think, Ben, that what's going on here really is a lot of hindsight analysis. If you look at the period between 1974 and up to about the mid-1980s, you were in a period where the district could pretty much afford many of the things that it was doing. Budgets were balanced between 1981 and 1989, so that in that period there was a feeling that the home rule was working pretty well. There were many more things people wanted, but there was no feeling at that point, because you didn't have the budget crisis that you have now, that it wasn't working. So people are looking now at the crisis that we're in now and making a summary judgment that nothing worked. I think that's fundamentally unfair.
Well, listen, let me just ask a question. Let's show something up on the screen. The population of the District of Columbia has declined dramatically, as we mentioned in the setup piece, by about 25% since 1960. And in the 1980s, 49,000 blacks left and 8,000 whites arrived. So you still have 40,000 people net leaving, which is about 8% of the city in just one decade. Why is that happening, and how is that related to all of these problems that you're talking about.
Let me say the peak years for the outmigration of the District of Columbia were 1985 and 1986. And what you had at that period, you had it all over the country. If you look at the census data for 1990, all over the country you had the arrival of a black middle class that all of a sudden could afford to move out. I was not long ago in the city of Detroit. It's a 90% black school system, 70% black population. You've got 8-9 acres of empty housing where in that city the black population moved out to the suburbs. So this was happening in many places, and people were moving out for schools because they could afford better housing. And yet, I think in terms of the media image,
the big one was crime.
yeah,
Right.
big one was crime. But we had in terms of the media image of the problem is that we have tried to do what he has suggested, which is to say pinpoint somewhere within the existing governmental setup the causes for that, and the causes are not there.
Yes, I think you have to look at it from two perspectives. I think Ron is right from the national perspective. If you look at what we call the vicious cycle of the urban crisis that occurs all over the country, that has been occurring, and Washington has participated in that with the exodus of folks. But also there is something unique about this federal district that is not true about other urban areas, and I think we also have to look at that in terms of analyzing the situation.
But I think you can't ignore what was happening at the time. You can't ignore the fact that every day or every other day in the paper there were articles about Marion Barry's drug problem. And the city was in an economic decline as much of the other cities. And people
don't forget the crack cocaine epidemic of '86.
Same
We went
period.
through the roof with extraordinary record-breaking homicides.
Exactly.
The whole system of the city was falling apart, even as our own mayor at the time was using drugs privately too, as it came out in 19.
Exactly.
But that's always the local government. The local
I wanna-
government was not running the city well by that time. Now Dwight was there at the beginning of the Barry years.
What
and
was
he
your
knows
job?
it's not
What was your
running
job,
well.
Dwight?
My job at first was secretary of the district, which was basically an administrative job in the mayor's office. And then the last 5 years I was director of intergovernmental relations, which I really honchoed the relations between the Congress and the district and between the DC Council and the district. But let me speak to this. I think that when we talk about management in the district, I just don't think that you can get away from that. Yes, we can put it on the general urban crisis, the Reagan devolution policies. Those are easy way outs, I think. I think we have to look at what was going on in the district government.
Easy. Are they accurate?
Yeah,
That's the point.
I don't think they're exactly
They're
accurate.
but you
I
have to
think
raise the question, I think, Ron, which is what Dwight is talking about. Is like, what percentage of that was the problem?
And nobody
and You
knows.
would, and I would,
Well, but
I would say just
no one knows.
Just,
Good.
But
I
let me
would say that
just
at
say
least-
from an
let
eyewitness
Jonetta finish up.
perspective.
Okay, one second.
I would say that at least maybe 40% of that was the problem.
do you know?
Because you had at one point prior to that, you had an enormous amount of money and revenue coming into this city in terms of the amount of commercial establishments that were the kind of taxes that were coming into the city. So there was money in this city. What happened to it? It was misused and misappropriated.
That's just ridiculous.
No,
no,
that's
it's not
ridiculous,
that's-
Ron.
that's
That is
fact.
absolutely
That
not
is
ridiculous.
No, that's not fact.
I was
That's
there
not
in
fact.
the government.
That's not
I
fact.
was there in the government. I was an eyewitness.
Well,
I
a
know,
lot of us were
I know
eyewitnesses
what
to
was.
it.
I know what was going on. I know the bogus contracts that were let. The money that was wasted just through basic inefficiency.
In
the
every city.
The resistance
In every
to
city.
reform. The resistance
In
to
every
reform.
city.
Oh,
From
But
the
see,
very
we
top.
couldn't
let me
afford
ask
that.
you-
The district couldn't afford to do what every city does because some of those cities have a state to bail it out, and there are other jurisdictions
Well, see,
that
now
are.
we're getting
Ron,
to the point.
let
We're
me
to
ask
the
you a
point.
question. Washington, D.C. has the highest proportion of city workers to total population than any city in the country. The city is about 550,000, and as I understand it, there are about 50,000 employees of the city.
About 40,000.
40,000.
It's been down a little, okay, which is, what, 8%, which is an enormous, I mean, you have 40,000 people as city workers in a city of a little more than 500,000 people. That is way off the charts in terms
it's
of any
not-
other
Well,
city.
but see-
Is that correct? I
Well,
mean,
yeah, I was going to say, I mean, the
That's
issue
correct.
here is not
That's
just
correct.
the
That's
numbers.
correct.
What you've got really is this is not a typical city. You've got a city that has run both city type and state type programs.
And county
so,
type programs.
And county type. So you can't simply extrapolate those numbers for this so-called city, which is a hybrid, and compare it to other cities.
we residents of the district pay very high
And
taxes.
You
we
do.
get to the taxes are high here because Congress principally the members of Congress from Maryland and Virginia said when the government was created in 1974 that you shall not have the right to tax the incomes in the city. Right now in this city, 70% of the jobs are held by people who work in the city but live in the suburbs. Each year, Maryland collects $600+ million that goes to their state treasury from jobs in the city. Virginia collects $400 million.
Okay, who here is for D.C. statehood?
I'm for D.C. state.
You're for D.C. state? Are you for D.C.
I'm for-
statehood?
No, I'm for
No,
financial autonomy. I think the city
Right.
should have financial and legislative autonomy. I do not think that it can afford state.
Well,
I think we
yeah.
should look at what's going on in other federal districts in the world, Canberra, Brasilia, some of the other ones, where the residents do have voting representation in the national legislatures, and yet they don't have what you call complete
I'm something
autonomy.
of a radical. I'm for something called no taxation without representation. I'm for
There
things
you
like
go again.
I'm for democracy. We're spending billions to try to bring democracy to Bosnia, but somehow or another the people of Washington, and that means mainly black people, don't deserve the richness of this country. It's called democracy, and the question is why? Because people think, well, black people can't run that government. Well, the system.
Come on, I mean, listen.
But I'm not-
But I think
nobody
Ben's-
But
moved
people
into
tell me
this
that.
That's
city.
what I was gonna
Nobody
say.
moved into this city and got tricked. It starts out with the country. 1789, they say
And
this
that's
is
right,
not
Ben.
gonna. You're not gonna vote. You're not gonna have representation.
Exactly.
If you want to move into Maryland, you'll get representation. If you want to move to Virginia or New York or Texas, you got
Which is
representation.
why
That's
some
right.
people
And
are
it is
moving
not a
into
trick.
And I
Maryland
agree
and
with you.
Virginia.
It's not like moving under an airport
Yeah.
then trying to stop the plane. What I'm
right.
suggesting is that if we're looking for solutions to the city, every solution tends to be imposed on the city and not so
right.
much coming from the people. And as Tip O'Neill said, all politics is local. If it doesn't come from the local,
But this
it
is the
doesn't
federal
work.
district.
But Tip
This
O'Neill was
is
wrong,
the federal
of course.
district. And until you change the Constitution,
No, I
this
think the
is
federal government has a role to
district.
play.
The
Hold on one
citizens-
second. We have talked about the problems. We're going to talk about some potential solutions in a moment. But first, I would like to get your answer to this question. Those of us who live in the district, particularly in the so-called nice parts, think this is a lovely, fantastic city to live in. And yet, all the press that you get is crime capital and murders. Is there? And you have so many media people living in these good areas. What?
The news media is at fault. I'm a member of the news media, it is at fault. I believe I used to work at the Washington Post and I covered city politics. I think the Washington Post has a Vietnam program for the city that you've got to destroy the village to save it. It is unrelentingly negative about the city. You go to any other place in America, Atlanta where there was the Olympics, and you do a certain amount of building up the region where you are, but you also do hard-hitting, aggressive journalism. The Washington Post, and I'm sorry to say, in its editorial policy and in some of its news stories, only has half a loaf. And it creates an incredible image because the Post is the institution that the Congress reads, not my TV station, not the little city paper. And so
Not
that's the
Jonetta
problem.
Barras' Washington Times.
And so, no,
The Republicans read your
Oh,
paper.
that's true. They
but
do.
not when it comes to city issues, it is the Washington Post that speaks the most to
Well,
the Congress.
lately it's been the Washington Times in terms of the Republican Congress. But I think you're right. I think
Thank God for Newt
the
Gingrich.
Washington Post editorial board has been schizophrenic, just absolutely schizophrenic. They support home rule strongly, but then when it gets to reform, they vacillate.
And I'm not a news person, but as someone who tries to contribute articles to the newspaper, I haven't, and who has tried to make the structural case for the problem of the District of Columbia. The fact is, nobody wants to hear it, and certainly in the media, press in particular, print journalism. I haven't had an article accepted in 2 years on that issue.
No,
It's a-
I
it's a
think-
complex-
but
let me
what I
just-
don't understand is with all these. I mean, everybody in Washington seems to be a journalist or a lawyer. With all these journalists, you would think there would be some sort of genre of article that says, "Boy, I live in this."
Ignorance is incredible.
I live in this. I mean, where else do you have a cosmopolitan capital where you can be living in quarter-acre zoning 10 minutes from downtown? I mean, you
I
can't
like
do it
to
in
say- I
Paris,
like to
you
say-
can't do it in London, you can't do it in New York, you can't do it anywhere.
Well,
I mean,
I
you've had a hard time,
It's
Ben,
an
trying-
unbelievably lovely city in many ways, I think.
In your own writings, you've had a hard time on a national level trying to address the issue of people who are simply filled with gloom and doom and trying to rip down the country in terms of where it's going. It's the same problem those of us in Washington have. We cannot break through the ignorance, and that's what Tom Foley was the Speaker of the House. He now runs the Federal City Council. He admitted the other day he had no concept of the inequity on the tax. Speaker Gingrich understands it. As a city resident, I am glad his ethics problems so far have not brought him down.
Let's talk about some solutions now. The Republicans have shown a lot of interest in this thing. They're talking about school vouchers. They're talking about a tax break. Are these good ideas?
I'm certainly in favor of school vouchers. I think that they have come up with several ideas, the school vouchers, the charter schools. I'm not so sure that D.C. Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton's plan of a flat tax of 15% flat taxes is an appropriate.
I'm for it.
I know. You know, it's really funny. Most people in your income bracket are for it. The people in the lower income bracket, because it might push them out of the city, are less for it. And that's my concern with that, is that it may push out those poor people who don't own their property, live in apartments, and may not be protected by rent control once a 15% flat tax goes into effect. Right. The other drive is to remove the rent control that is presently in the city. So that has some problems.
Let me bring up a topic that periodically comes up that I happen to think makes some sense. Is the District of Columbia was originally carved out of two states, Virginia and Maryland, and made into a federal district. In the mid-1800s, Virginia said, we want our part back, and that is today suburban Virginia. And the idea is, why don't we give the current district back to Maryland? It would then have a congressman of its own, more or less. It would participate in the election of a governor and of two senators. Wouldn't that be a good solution?
I have a short answer to that. One, Maryland doesn't want it. And if you're going to spend that much money to pay Maryland, why don't you spend the money to fix the city? And B, Virginia doesn't want to give up its income taxes of $400+ million it gets from the city. So it's not viably going to work. And C, the people of Washington are a distinct place. We don't want, I as a citizen don't want to be a Marylander. My son was born in the District of Columbia. We are Washingtonians, and that we don't want somebody to improve the plantation, as it were, by simply spending more money or sending it back to Maryland. Why doesn't Maryland join the District of Columbia?
Doesn't even matter what you want, Tom. The Congress isn't going to stand for that, because there is supposed to be a special district for the federal government.
The fallacy is that you can cleanly separate out the non-federal territory in the district from the rest of it and make it a part of Maryland. You can't do that. There are too many, you would have a pockmarked kind of situation.
Okay, we are unfortunately running out of time, and I would like to close this with a brief sort of discussion. What about President Clinton's plan? Will somebody first explain it and then take it apart?
I'll do a quick TV reporter version.
Okay, you're on.
The president, after doing nothing virtually for 4 years, said that he announced a plan that he wants the federal government to take over state-like functions, that is the running of the prisons, the running of the courts. He wants to improve the federal match to Medicaid, which is drowning the city, and he wants to relieve the city of an unfunded pension liability for employees that was built up under the federal system, but for which the city was stuck after he got home rule. All of those things amount to about $1 billion in services a year. In return, the city would stop getting its $660 million federal payment and an additional $52 million payment that the city receives from the federal government to help fund those pensions I just mentioned. So it's kind of a wash. The city gets a little more money, but it no longer has to deal with those state functions. And the president says...
It's $300 million a year more or something, the way you...
Well, it depends on how you add the money up. As you know, statistics can be done in any way, but roughly it's a wash. In Washington, $300 million is nothing. The question is, does the plan maybe goes too far? The General Accounting Office said said last summer, if you fix the pensions and you fix Medicaid, the city would have a balanced budget. I think people around the country need to understand that the president should get credit for at least proposing a plan that Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton says. You may not like the plan, but this city has been so badly abused by the Congress, the federal government, and its local elected
But
leaders.
as you said, it was 4 years late.
Well, it was 4 years late. He made a dramatic walk through the city when he first was elected 4 years ago, and then he forgot, he lost his map or something because he never came back.
Okay, thank you, Dwight Cropp, Tom Sherwood, Jonetta Barras, and Ron Walters. And thank you. We depend on your views to make our show better. Please send your questions, comments, and suggestions to New River Media, 1150 17th Street, Northwest, Washington, D.C. 20036, or email us at thinktank@pbs.org. To learn more about Think Tank, visit PBS online at www.pbs.org. For Think Tank, I'm Ben Wattenberg.
This has been a production of BJW Incorporated in association with New River Media, which are solely responsible for its content.